Harrison Ford's fiery walkout on Jimmy Kimmel, the clash of authenticity and Hollywood gimmicks. Harrison Ford stormed onto the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live, but what followed was anything but a typical late-night appearance. What began as a promotional interview quickly turned into a fiery confrontation, ending with the legendary actor walking out mid-show. The cause of this explosive showdown? A clash over the soul of Hollywood itself, authenticity versus spectacle. Let's break down how this intense moment unfolded, with some behind-the-scenes details that led to Ford's dramatic exit. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Let's see who's here for this epic confrontation. The atmosphere at Jimmy Kimmel Live in Los Angeles was electric. The lights were sharp, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Tonight's headliner was none other than Harrison Ford, the grizzled star of countless adventures, his weathered charisma filling the room. Ford was on the show to promote his latest film, a gritty sci-fi tale about a rogue pilot fighting against a corporate-controlled galaxy. The film's themes, rebellion, freedom, and raw, honest storytelling, were deeply personal to Ford. Ford had little patience for the glitz and sensationalism that often characterized talk show interviews. He wasn't here to perform for the cameras. He was here for the work. Any detour into the shallow, gimmicky side of Hollywood risked his temper, something his manager Ellen knew all too well. A tough, no-nonsense professional, Ellen had already warned the producers backstage, "Keep it focused, no gimmicks." She knew Ford's blunt personality and how he could bristle at inauthenticity. Her instructions were clear and non-negotiable. Despite Ellen's stern warning, the producers were set on making Ford's appearance a viral moment. They saw an opportunity to play up Ford's action hero persona, thinking they could capitalize on his tough guy image. But Ellen wasn't fooled. Her cold, unwavering stare as she watched the producers whispering backstage said it all. "They're poking a bear," she muttered under her breath. Backstage, Ford sat sipping his coffee, his eyes glancing at the monitor as Jimmy Kimmel kicked off the show. Kimmel was in his element, delivering a sharp monologue about tabloid fodder, the crowd laughing along. But Ford's expression remained flat, his fingers tapping the table, a subtle sign that his patience was already thinning. Ellen recognized the signs immediately. Ford was on edge. The stage manager signaled that it was time for Ford to take the stage. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the curtain. No entourage, no fanfare, just a man ready to face the spotlight. As the crowd roared, Jimmy pivoted from his usual banter to introduce the evening's guest, his voice warm and inviting. The one and only Harrison Ford. The band struck up a driving riff, and the crowd erupted into applause. Ford walked onto the stage with his trademark steady stride and a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook Jimmy's hand firmly, briefly, and then sat down, his posture relaxed but alert. As the crowd's cheers faded, the atmosphere in the studio tightened. All eyes were on the two men, and it didn't take long for the tension to escalate. Kimmel began the interview smoothly, asking Ford about his new film, its themes of rebellion and the fight against corporate control. Ford leaned in, his voice gruff but earnest as he talked about the pilot's struggle. His conviction was palpable, and the crowd was with him, nodding along. Ford had them hooked with his message about storytelling that cuts through the noise of corporate agendas, but Jimmy Kimmel had a show to run and he couldn't help himself from pivoting to a lighter vibe. He tossed out a quip about Ford's iconic role as Han Solo, asking if he still dreamed of flying the Millennium Falcon. Ford's smile was thin and his answer was curt. "I'm past that." The crowd chuckled, but there was an undeniable edge in Ford's tone, a signal that Kimmel missed completely. Sensing an opportunity to play up the action hero aspect, Kimmel pulled out a story about Ford supposedly improvising a wild stunt during filming. He was looking for a laugh, but Ford's eyes hardened at the mention. His jaw tightened, and he shot back. "Didn't happen. Final." The response was flat, with no room for further elaboration. The audience shifted uncomfortably, a few gasps punctuating the silence. Some nervous laughs followed, unsure of how to react. But Kimmel, ever the showman, wasn't ready to let the moment pass. He reached for a prop, a toy blaster, and held it up with a wink, saying, "Come on, Han Solo, one shot for the fans." The audience clapped, buying into the gag, but Ford remained unmoved. His eyes locked on Kimmel, and his irritation was palpable. In a low, sharp voice, he told Kimmel, "Put that crap away." The words cut through the air like a whip, and the studio fell into a stunned silence. Kimmel, still holding the toy blaster, tried to laugh it off, but his chuckle was thin and uneasy. "All right, no blasters tonight," he said, setting the toy down on the desk. But the damage had been done. The crowd, which had been buzzing with energy just moments before, now sat in tense silence. Their earlier excitement had morphed into a nervous hum as Ford's eyes remained fixed on Kimmel, his frustration crackling in the air. Backstage, Ellen could see the storm brewing. Her hands clenched in frustration as she whispered to the stage manager, "I told them to keep it real." She knew what was coming. Sure enough, moments later, the showdown reached its peak. Ford, fed up with the inauthenticity of the show, stood up abruptly, his decision made. With a sharp glance at Kimmel, he walked off the stage, leaving the host and the audience in stunned silence. Kimmel, visibly flustered, tried to salvage the moment, but it was too late. Ford was done. The backstage fallout was immediate. Ellen's words had proven prescient. The producers had pushed too far. The tension that had been building throughout the interview finally reached its boiling point, and Ford, ever the professional, refused to play along with their gimmicks. The impact of Ford's walkout reverberated beyond the studio. The story quickly spread across social media, with fans and critics alike dissecting the fiery exchange. Some supported Ford, praising his refusal to engage in the superficiality of Hollywood talk shows, while others criticized Kimmel for not reading the room. In the end, this wasn't just a moment of television drama. It was a stark reminder of the power of authenticity in an industry often dominated by spectacle. Harrison Ford had once again proven that he would not be played by Hollywood's rules. Ford's clash with Kimmel. Tensions escalate. Behind the scenes, as the control booth prepped for a commercial, the director hesitated, watching the ratings spike with every second of Harrison Ford's defiance. Jimmy, sensing the sour shift in the room, tried to readjust, squirming in his seat as he struggled to steer the conversation back on track. "Let's get back to the film," Jimmy said, forcing a calm tone, hoping to diffuse the situation. He asked about the sci-fi pilot's motivations, aiming to tap into Ford's passion for honest storytelling. Ford responded in his usual gruff, steady manner, diving deep into the character's fight against corporate control, emphasizing the need for truth in a world that often sanitizes it. Then, Ford paused, leaning forward, his tone hardening. "That's what this is about," he said, his eyes locked on Kimmel. "Not your cheap stunts for clicks." The words landed with impact and the crowd reacted instantly. Some applauded while others gasped, splitting the room into two factions. Jimmy's smile tightened as he nervously tapped his cue card. He had navigated tricky guests before, but Ford's blunt frustration was unraveling the show. Trying to regain control, Jimmy quickly pivoted to ask about the film's visual effects, but Ford wasn't having it. "You're not listening," Ford cut him off, his voice rising slightly. "I came here to talk about something that matters, not to be your prop for laughs." The audience stirred, some cheering, "Go, Harrison," while others booed, mistaking the tension for theatrics. Jimmy glanced at the floor producer, who was signaling to move on, but Ford's voice only grew sharper, his irritation clear. "This whole setup," he said, gesturing at the set, the lights, "it's a dodge, a way to avoid what's real." The crowd's noise swelled, feeding off Ford's conviction. Jimmy tried to lean into his charm, grinning. "Hey, Harrison, we're just having fun." "No offense meant," he said, but the words fell flat. The audience could sense it, and Ford shook his head slowly, deliberate and pointed. "Fun?" he scoffed, his voice thick with disdain. "You think people want this fluff? They want stories that mean something." Some people in the crowd stood cheering while others heckled, and the studio crackled with tension. Ellen backstage muttered, "They're in over their heads." The security team, 2 men in dark suits, inched closer to the stage but hesitated, knowing full well the weight of Ford's presence. Backstage, the producers were scrambling, voices overlapping in the control booth. The director was torn, ratings were soaring, but the situation was slipping out of control. "Let it ride, but be ready to cut," the director snapped. Meanwhile, Jimmy, still on stage, tried to regain control by asking about Ford's co-stars, hoping respect would calm the storm. But Ford was done with the script. "You don't get it," he said, his voice steady, pointed. "You think you can spin this into a gag? I'm not here for your sensationalist garbage." The crowd roared, some chanting his name, others calling for Jimmy to push back. Jimmy's composure cracked. His eyes narrowed and he leaned forward, dropping the nice guy act. "Look, Harrison," he said, his tone now sharp. "We invited you here to share your film." He paused. "Maybe show a little gratitude for that." That was the spark that ignited Ford's fury. His eyes flashed, his jaw tightening. "Gratitude?" he replied, his voice low and cutting. "For turning my work into a circus?" The audience erupted. The noise rattled the set as some people stood filming, others shouting. Jimmy's face contorted in frustration, his hands gripping the desk. The floor producer signaled for a break, but the cameras kept rolling. This moment was too big to stop. Trying to regain control, Jimmy stood, attempting to calm the situation. "All right, folks, we'll take a quick break," he said, forcing a laugh. The band kicked in, but Ford didn't move. His stare was unrelenting, and the crowd could feel the tension in the air. The studio was chaos. Boos, cheers, and shouts of "Harrison Ford" filled the air. As Jimmy called for a commercial break, his smile was strained. He waved to the audience, trying to maintain control, but his eyes flicked nervously to the floor producer, who was signaling frantically to cut. The director in the booth, however, was glued to the soaring ratings. Ford hadn't budged. His stare locked on Jimmy, frustration with inauthentic storytelling palpable in the room. Backstage, Ellen glared at the producers, her voice low and fierce. "You pushed him too far." The tension escalates. Ford and Kimmel's showdown reaches its peak. The security team hovers near the stage, tense and waiting for a signal, their eyes darting between Ford and the chaos unfolding. As the band fades into silence, Jimmy leans toward Ford, his voice low and off mic. But the front row catches fragments of the conversation. "Let's just do this right, Harrison," Jimmy pleads, a mix of frustration and irritation in his tone. Ford's response is barely audible, his words sharp. "You crossed the line." The crowd stirs, phones raised to capture the moment, already going viral. Sensing the situation slipping further out of control, Jimmy attempts to rally the audience, raising his hands in a desperate plea for calm. "Folks, we've got Harrison Ford, let's show some love," he says. But the applause is uneven, drowned by shouts from all sides, some cheering for Ford, others urging Jimmy to push back. The room is a powder keg, and Ford's unwavering stance on authenticity is the spark that threatens to set it off. With arms crossed and his expression unreadable, Ford leans back, unfazed by the crowd's divided reaction. He's not there for applause. He's there to defend the value of honest storytelling. The stage manager, sweating nervously, signals Jimmy to wrap it up, but Jimmy isn't ready to let go. He grabs a cue card, attempting to steer the conversation back to neutral ground by asking about the film's director. Ford cuts him off immediately, his voice gruff and sharp. "You're still not hearing me," he says, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "I came to talk about something real, not to feed your sensationalist game." The room erupts, some standing and cheering while others boo. The divide in the crowd is stark, and Jimmy's usual charm cracks under the weight of Ford's relentless push. Jimmy attempts to laugh it off, but the tension is palpable. "Harrison, it's just a show," he says, gesturing toward the set. "We're here to entertain." Ford's eyes narrow, his voice dropping with calculated intent. "Entertain?" he repeats. "You're burying truth under your cheap hype." His words hit hard and the audience reacts instantly, some shouting in support, others heckling. The noise is overwhelming and Ellen, backstage, nods grimly, aware that Ford's not backing down. The security team inches closer, but they tread carefully, mindful of Ford's iconic presence. Backstage, the producers are in disarray, voices overlapping in the control booth. The director is torn. The ratings are massive, but this is spiraling, out of control. "Keep it going, but be ready to cut," he orders. On stage, Jimmy tries one last time to steer things back, asking about Ford's preparation for the role, his tone almost desperate. But Ford's patience is gone. "You're wasting my time," he snaps, his voice like a blade. "This isn't about the film anymore. It's about you thinking you can turn me into a prop for your nonsense." The crowd erupts into action, some chanting Ford's name, others arguing in the stands. The studio is alive with energy. Jimmy's patience finally snaps. He leans forward, his voice no longer the polished charm of a host. "Harrison," he says, his tone sharp, pointing at the desk. "We brought you here to talk. Show some respect for that." It's a misstep, and Ford's eyes flash with fire. He leans in, his voice low and cutting. "Respect's earned," he says. "Not by making a mockery of what I do." The room explodes in reaction, roars of approval, boos, the noise deafening. Some are filming, others shouting. The director, finally sensing the need for a break, calls for it. The monitors flash with ads, but Ford remains seated, his gaze fixed and unrelenting. Jimmy stands off stage, his voice sharp as he argues with the floor producer, his gestures frantic. Ellen watches from the wings, her stare locked on the security team. Two large men in suits now inches from the stage, cautious but tense. The director's voice crackles through the headsets, but the real action is unfolding on stage. Ford hasn't moved. His frustration with the inauthenticity of talk show. Entertainment is a force of nature. The tension peaks. Ford and Kimmel's showdown reaches its breaking point. The lights snap back on as the break ends, the band stumbling into a quick riff. Jimmy Kimmel returns to his seat, his smile tight and strained, trying to project calm but failing to hide his tension. "We're back with Harrison Ford," he says, his voice pushing warmth. But the crowd's applause is scattered, still raw from Ford's earlier stand on authenticity. Jimmy attempts to steer the conversation by asking about the film's themes of resistance, hoping to ground things in Ford's passion for genuine storytelling. Ford answers, his voice steady and gruff, delving into the pilot's fight against corporate lies. But then, he shifts, his tone hardening. "That's what this should be about," he says, pointing at the set. "Not your hype to dodge what's real." The crowd stirs, some cheering, others visibly shifting, the divide clear. Jimmy's fingers grip a pen tightly, his smile fading. "We're just giving people a fun escape," he says, leaning back, trying to appeal to the audience. "That's the deal, right?" Some in the crowd cheer, but the boos quickly overpower them. The room tilts toward Ford's conviction. "Escape?" Ford's voice is low and biting. "You're burying truth under your sensationalist garbage." The audience erupts, some standing, clapping, others yelling at Jimmy to push back. Ellen, watching from the wings, mutters, "He's got him." The security team inches closer, their presence heavier but still holding back. Jimmy's control begins to slip. His voice rises, now tinged with anger. "Harrison, you're a guest here," he says, pointing at the desk. "We're showing you respect. Maybe give some back." The crowd senses the challenge, their noise spiking. Ford's eyes narrow, his jaw set. "Respect," he repeats, his voice steady but fierce. "You don't earn it by turning my work into a cheap stunt." The words land like a punch, and the audience erupts once again, some chanting Ford's name, others booing. The tension in the studio is palpable. Jimmy's face flushes. His hands grip the desk, trying to maintain composure. He attempts to laugh, but it's hollow. "This is a talk show, Harrison, not a soapbox," he says, his tone cutting. "You want to preach? Find another stage." That's the trigger. Ford leans in, his voice gruff and unyielding. "I came to talk about something real," he says, nodding toward the crowd. You made it a circus, I don't play for your hype. The crowd explodes, some standing, filming, others shouting. The set vibrates with their energy. Jimmy stands, breaking the host's code of conduct, his voice rising. You know what, Harrison? If you don't like it, you don't have to stay. The words hang in the air like a challenge, raw and direct. The audience loses it, the noise deafening. Ellen steps closer to the stage, her eyes locked on Ford, ready to intervene. The floor producer signals to security, whispering urgently, Get ready. The security team moves in, their steps heavy but they're cautious. Ford doesn't rise. His presence dominates the room, his eyes locked on Jimmy, frustration radiating off him like a palpable force. Maybe I won't, he says, his voice calm but cutting. The crowd roars, some cheering, others jeering. The room feels like a battlefield. Jimmy's had enough. His face is flushed, pointing at Ford. Then go, he says, his voice loud, final. The audience gasps, the noise peaks, some standing to film, others shouting. The director yells through the headsets, demanding a cut, but the cameras keep rolling. The moment is too massive to stop. Ford remains seated, his stare unwavering, meeting Jimmy's glare with an intensity that could crack stone. His frustration, over talk show, sensationalism is a blazing force visible to millions watching live. The audience is on its feet, some chanting Ford's name, others urging Jimmy to hold his ground. Phones are up, streaming the chaos in real time. Backstage, Ellen is poised, her eyes darting between Ford and the security team, now only steps from the stage, cautious but ready. The floor producer's voice is desperate, urging Jimmy to pull back, but the host is too far gone. Jimmy, face flushed, points at Ford again, his voice raw. We gave you a stage to share your film, he says, gesturing to the set. The tension explodes. Ford's bold stand leaves Jimmy Kimmel stunned. The audience reacts in waves. Some cheer, others boo, the noise building like a tidal wave. Ford stands, slow and deliberate, his presence commanding the room. His fight for authentic storytelling is unyielding. Wreck it, Ford responds, his voice gruff and searing. You turned it into a circus. I'm done with your hype. The crowd erupts, some standing and clapping, others shouting. The set trembles with their energy. Ellen, watching from the wings, nods with a tight, proud expression, knowing Ford has drawn his line in the sand. The security guards move in. One steps forward, his voice firm but cautious. Sir, it's time to go, aware of Ford's iconic stature. Ford turns his stare toward him, halting the guard's approach, not aggressive but resolute. I'm walking, he says, his tone final. Ellen pushes forward, her voice sharp. He leaves on his terms. She snaps at the floor producer, who's clearly floundering and outmatched. Ford glances at Jimmy, then surveys the audience, his face unwavering. I said what I needed to, he tells the room, his voice steady and fierce. Then without another word, he strides off stage, his steps calm and purposeful, leaving the crowd in a mix of cheers, gasps, and shouts. Jimmy is left standing, trying to fill the void. The band awkwardly launches into a shaky riff. He forces, a smile and waves. Well, that was something, folks, he says, his voice unsteady, desperately trying to spin the moment. The audience laughs, but it's fractured, the energy splintered. Backstage, the producers are in full chaos. The director shouts about salvaging the show, while Ellen follows Ford to the green room. As he grabs his jacket, unfazed, she mutters, Told him no stunts. Ford grunts, his mind already moving on. Outside, the internet is on fire. Clips of the showdown spread rapidly. Fans and critics are picking sides. The show limps toward its end, Jimmy rushing through the final segments, his usual charm dimmed by Ford's powerful stand. The story of Ford's exit overshadows everything, a moment that will be etched in talk show history. The night Ford walked in, fought for authentic storytelling, and left on his own terms, will never be forgotten. As Ford steps into the Los Angeles night, the studio's chaos fades behind him. He's not just leaving, he's redefined the battle, leaving a mark no one will forget. That's the story, folks. What a showdown. If you're hooked on these raw Hollywood battles, hit that subscribe button to catch more. We're building a crew that loves the real stuff. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Maybe Chicago, Tokyo, or some small town off the grid. What do you think? Was Ford right to walk, or did he go too far? Like the video, share it with your friends, and let's keep this conversation alive. Stay real, stay bold, and I'll see you in the next one.